I still think you should pursue that demographic, because ultimately it's about yourself. I mean, you don't, for instance, I really like chess, but I don't ever expect to pick up a girl through playing chess. But I don't want to give that up just because there's not girls there. So pursue it, make it part of your identity, for no other reason than it makes you an interesting, well-rounded person. But you know, you can pursue women in other aspects of your identity, because we all inhabit different demographics. You know, it's like I'm really into, I like chess a lot, but I'm really into music, and I like to go out and party, and I travel a lot. So like these are all demographics that I inhabit, and they all make me a varied and interesting person. And some demographics are better avenues for me to meet interesting women than others. And so I pursue those for dating, but I pursue all of them because I care about them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So guys, like someone that's just like likes video games, for example.
Right.
You should, you know, if you're consumed in that, then what steps would a guy like that take? Like you should find more.
Find other interests and other
lifestyle.
hobbies. Yeah, other interests and other hobbies. And then the other option, I mean, video games is rough because it's such a disproportionate ratio. But you know, something like you know, anime conventions. I remember years ago, one of my clients actually took me to an anime convention, and you know, everybody's dressed up and like they've got these cool costumes and stuff. I don't know anything about anime, and the ratio was probably 3 or 4 guys to each girl. But the funny thing is that like in subcultures like that, none of the guys have any clue what they're doing with women. So like, if you're the one guy, even if you're in a situation, if you're in an environment where it's like 3 to 1 guys to girls, but you're like one of like, you know, 1% of guys who actually has any idea what he's doing, like can actually go up and flirt with the girl and like hit on her and ask her out, then you have no competition. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd be careful to judge it specifically just on ratio. But yeah, you want to have varied interests. You want to have vary your identity, diversify your identity, and then pursue each of those things, each of those demographics that you're in, to the fullest of your extent. You know, if you're hardcore in the video games, yeah, at a video game event there's like 10 girls for like 2,000 guys. But hey, if you're there and no other guy's talking to her, go talk to her. Why not? Like, you never know. So again, this kind of comes back to like not trying to measure everything. You know, just. And if the only demographics that you're active in are not fulfilling your need for women, for dating, then find another demographic to pursue that you care about or that you're interested in. That's a good question. I think there's 2 ways to kind of start at it. One is start simple. Just say, okay, I'm going to do one new thing this week. And just make that a goal for, say, a few months. Like one new thing each week, one new activity each week. That's typically the simplest place to start. And then, because kind of the amazing thing is when you start getting invested in things and invested in new things, like, you find ways to make time for things if you care about them. And we're going to talk about this after lunch with the whole, like, when women flake on you and they're like, oh, I'm so busy. If you care about something, you make time for it. And that's true for all of us. So I think if you just start trying new things, eventually you'll find something you care about enough that you will make time for it. The second way is to start, because time management basically comes down to habits. And a lot of us have a lot of, because the problem with time management isn't that we're doing things that take too long, or that we're doing things that take a long time. It's that we're doing things that we're not conscious of. Like, we spend a lot of time on activities that we're not conscious of. For instance, like checking Facebook or watching shit on YouTube. Like, a lot of us spend probably hour and a half a day doing just on that without even noticing, because it's just a habit. You go to Facebook, you start scrolling through stuff, see funny cat pictures, and you're looking at cat pictures, then you see some stupid video, and you're watching video, and next thing you know, like 40 minutes are gone. Same thing with television. Same thing with, hell, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of examples. So kind of doing like a surveying like your habits and where your time's actually going. A friend of mine is a writer, Sebastian Marshall, did a really cool thing on his site. He actually logged like an entire week of his time. It's like every single thing he did, he wrote down into a spreadsheet. Like 10:42 to 10:51, I watched this dumb thing on YouTube. And then he went back through and looked, and he looked at stuff that he wasn't aware that he spent time doing. Like, I mean, basically what he found was stuff that he thought he spent a lot of time on, he spent like half as much time on as he thought, and stuff he thought he spent very little time on, he spent like 2 or 3 times as much time on it. So, and then he was able to go through and start eliminating stuff. Be like, okay, I'm going to like delete this game from my computer. I'm going to like, there are programs you can set up that limit your time on websites and stuff like that. I'm going to limit my YouTube time to only after 9 o'clock, stuff like that. So that's a good place to start. I really don't. I think you should limit it to what interests you. I hate cooking, for instance. And I always joke, I'm like, whoever I marry is going to have to love to cook, because I can't even feed myself. Yeah, you do see a lot, like, especially when you look at like men's magazines, you see a lot of advice like that, like, man should know how to fix a toaster, and it's, I think that kind of stuff I find to be very superficial and ultimately inconsequential. It's, I think it's useful to try new things and try to learn new things regularly, both just in terms of, again, like enriching your identity and raising your self-esteem, but also, I mean, it does make you feel better about yourself when you actually do go out and you're like, I mean, I hate cooking, but the reason I know I hate cooking is I took a month once and I was like, I'm going to learn how to cook, and I bought a cookbook and all sorts of stuff, and I mean, going through that process is important. I think the actual result of what you enjoy doing and what you don't is far less important. So, codependent guys in the friend zone, and pretty much only inhabit over here because they're afraid to piss her off, they're afraid to be spontaneous, they're afraid to assert their own desires, and what they also do is they also try to bypass physical. Codependent guys tend to see it as verbal, emotional, then physical, whereas it doesn't work that way. Typically. Make sense? It's a good question. So this is something that I've been reading about a lot recently, and actually my next book is about, and I've been writing about it on my site a little bit more. Where to start? So basically, first of all, this is the interesting thing. Right now there's a perception that there's a crisis with masculinity. And I mentioned in the Q&A yesterday some of the problems that are kind of epidemic among the male population: homelessness, alcoholism, suicide, etc. And also as a population, men in certain segments of society, men have been falling behind women. There are more women graduating from college now. There are more women going to college now. There are more women taking entry-level jobs now. There are more female breadwinning families. With the latest recession, I think it was 75% of the jobs lost were men's jobs. So there's this perception that not only are women catching up, but in some areas they're actually surpassing us. On more of a social level, men seem to be becoming much more complacent. They're less interested in dating. They're less interested in marrying. They're less interested. They're pretty much more interested in partying and getting laid, like casual hookups, and fucking around and playing video games. And a lot of people are referring to this as a crisis in masculinity. Men are not men anymore. They're not being responsible. They're not getting good jobs. They're not making money. They're not being dominant. They're not being in charge. I take a little bit of a different view. One of the first things that really kind of got me thinking differently was that if you start going back through time, there are pretty much almost every generation or every 50 years or so, there has been a quote-unquote crisis of masculinity. So if you go back to the 1950s, which right now we kind of idealize the masculine gender role as being like the 1950s gender role, like Don Draper, breadwinner, making the decisions, bringing money home. In the 50s, there was a lot of social commentary talking about how masculinity is being lost, how boys were not growing up as men, how men were being too soft. If you go back to the 1920s with the first wave feminism, you'll see the same writings. With all the flappers and the jazz age and the partying, men are being too soft, they're being weak. Back then it was too many men are leaving the farm, and that was seen as a masculine social crisis. And this goes back to 1800s, 1700s. Even Shakespeare talked about it in one of his plays. I mean, it goes back all these generations. And so basically the conclusion I kind of came to is that basically masculinity evolves depending on the economic realities of society. And because masculinity is always evolving, every generation or every other generation develops the perception that masculinity is in crisis, that somehow men are not the same way they were earlier. But really all that's actually happening is masculinity is adapting. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that right now we're adapting. Part of that is because of feminism. Women entered the workforce in equal numbers and now in greater numbers than men. And then part of that is basically the information economy. So it used to be 100 years ago, 200 years ago, most of economic productivity came from agriculture and came from industrial production. So the labor that was useful was farming, working in a factory, working with machines, crafting things, building furniture, building machines, building cars, building carriages, whatever. And these are all activities that men have a natural advantage in. Men are naturally bigger, stronger, more durable. And so men had the economic advantage, therefore the male gender role, their perception of masculinity, adapted to fit those economic needs. Men need to be strong, they need to be durable, they need to be stoic, they need to not complain, and they need to make a lot of money. And as time has gone on, that's slowly shifted. But with the information economy, all the factory jobs are disappearing. We can either automate them or we can send them to China. Agriculture, long gone. Handcrafting jobs, again, outsourced, mass-produced, automated. So our economy is driven now through the service sector and through white-collar jobs, which primarily consists of sitting in a cubicle, processing data, organizing data, means management, means working with people, working with creativity, understanding relationships, marketing the people. These are all of the drivers of our economy now. But the old standards of masculinity, be strong, be durable, don't show emotion, don't complain, bring money home, isn't advantageous for this anymore. In fact, traditionally female gender roles, be empathetic, be understanding of others, see connections between people and things, this now has a natural advantage in the new economy. And so we're in a weird state of flux. And this is kind of my whole argument, is that masculinity needs to adapt. Basically, for hundreds and hundreds of years, it was economically advantageous for men to suppress and ignore their emotional realities. Our generation, the last couple of generations, are the first couple generations where it is no longer advantageous. It's no longer necessary, and it's hurting us now. Because we're not prepared to handle the realities of today's society, today's economy.